Hey guys, Tom Taylor from Rock News Desk coming at you. It's the 45th anniversary of Van Halen's third studio album, Women and Children First, and I want to tell you a fun story involving that album. It involves a photo shoot for the album that almost broke up the band. Yes, really. Now, I want to preface this by saying I love this story. Yes, admittedly, I love anything Dave-era Van Halen, but I feel a personal connection to this story as well. I'll tell you why near the end of this video. First, though, here's a little information about where the band was at that point in their careers. This should help put things in perspective. Women and Children First was released in 1980. Just 2 years earlier, the band burst onto the national stage when they released their cover of The Kinks' You Really Got Me. That song was a top 40 hit, peaking at number 36, and it began driving sales of the album. Once people bought the album, they heard Eruption, which made the jaws of many rock guitarists drop. They were scrambling to figure out how Eddie Van Halen made those sounds. Neil Schon from Journey was one of those guitarists. He said he wasn't able to figure it out until they brought Van Halen out on tour with them, and he actually asked Eddie how he did it. Eddie showed him his tapping technique backstage. That debut album by itself catapulted the band to stardom. It sold over 1 million copies in 1978, and many years later was certified diamond, which is 10 million copies sold. They followed that up the following year with another hit, Van Halen 2. Behind the singles Dance the Night Away, their first top 20 hit, and Beautiful Girls, the album quickly went gold. When it came time for their third album in 3 years, the band was beginning to show some internal cracks. Eddie and brother Alex had a kind of volatile relationship at times, but they were brothers, so any issues they had between each other were usually resolved quickly. David Lee Roth, on the other hand, was a different story. According to Dave, he and the Van Halen brothers never really got along that well. There was a respect there, but they were very different people. Alex and Eddie's musical influences were Black Sabbath and Cream. Dave's were more Motown, R&B, and Latin-inspired music. The Van Halens wanted to rock, and Dave wanted to dance. And it was more than just musical differences. Dave was really interested in art and fashion. The Van Halens didn't seem to care about either. Dave could and would talk nonstop. Eddie once said Dave could talk about nothing for an hour. They just clashed. They released Van Halen 1 on February 10th, 1978. Their world tour began less than a month later, playing America until the end of April, playing in Europe from May to June, hitting Japan for the rest of June, then back to America from July to September, then to Europe again for the month of October, then back to America for the entire month of November. All that was tour support for just the first album. They kept that same tour schedule the following year for Van Halen 2. By the time the band began recording Women and Children First in December 1979, they had spent way too much time together. So all of that and all that conflict brings us to the story I want to tell you about. Exact dates here are a bit sketchy, and I'll tell you why. Most fans will tell you the record was recorded and mixed in about 2 weeks. Common information found online will tell you the album was recorded between December 1979 and February 1980. But most information I can find about the actual events of this particular story put this in early December 1979, which would be, let's say, a week to a few weeks before recording the album. Either way, there was an album coming out within a few months, and it was time to get the visuals for the cover. Now, I'm sure this is going to be hard to believe, but David Lee Roth was feeling a little full of himself around this time. He had toured the world twice and was rock's newest sex symbol. While Eddie was on the cover of every guitar magazine imaginable, Dave was often seen bare-chested on the cover or as the centerfold of teen magazines, as well as music magazines. So Dave had an idea of what he wanted on the cover of Van Halen's latest record. Himself. He got in contact with Richard Serrini, the Warner Brothers art director, and told him he wanted Helmut Newton to do the album cover. For those of you who don't know, Helmut Newton was on top of the world in 1980 as far as photographers go. He truly was an icon of style, beauty, and risque, even kinky photography. He had also photographed some celebrities and even some rock stars like the Rolling Stones and David Bowie. But he was best known for his erotica and fashion work. This didn't matter to Dave. As far as he was concerned, he was the perfect photographer to capture the sexiest man in rock and roll. Serrini agreed that Newton would be a good choice for the cover art for the album. In fact, Serrini was friendly with Newton, and he knew he was currently visiting Los Angeles for a Playboy photo shoot. Dave began making some phone calls and found out Newton was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. According to Dave, he put on leather everything and went to meet Helmut Newton at the hotel pool. After a fun conversation, Newton said to Dave, "Do you know what, David? You are my new favorite blonde. I would love to shoot photos of you." Now, in case you aren't following exactly what's happening here, David Lee Roth wanted Helmut Newton to photograph him. Helmut Newton wanted to photograph Dave. The label, on the other hand, had intentions of paying Helmut Newton for a photo shoot of the band, with intentions of using photos for the upcoming Women and Children First record. Now keep in mind, Helmut Newton was one of the most famous photographers in the world. He stayed booked by clients like Italian, Australian, British, and French Vogue, Playboy, Harper's Bazaar, and he was expensive. While exact numbers aren't readily available, he likely was charging $5,000 or more for a single photo shoot. According to Serini, the art director for Warner, most albums had a very limited cover art budget, usually in the $1,500 range, and Helmut Newton was well outside that price point. With Newton on board for the photo shoot, a date was set. Dave talked to Serini, and Serini worked out the details with Newton. Once the date was set, Serini passed along the info to the rest of the band. They were told Helmut Newton would be photographing the band for the cover art for Women and Children First. The brothers had no clue who Helmut Newton was. Why were they doing a photo shoot with this guy they had never heard of? And wait a minute, why are we doing the photo shoot at David Lee Roth's estate in Pasadena? The estate actually belonged to Dave's father, Dr. Nathan Roth, a prominent eye surgeon in California. The property consisted of a 14,000 square foot mansion, complete with 10 bedrooms, a swimming pool, tennis court, and sprawling gardens. This was the same house the band used to practice in before hitting the big time. When the band reluctantly showed up for the photo shoot on the agreed upon morning, they found Helmut Newton and his assistants already working. Art director Serini was there, looking on. Everyone was in the pool area. David Lee Roth was shirtless. He was wearing nothing but leather pants, and he was standing in front of a chain-link fence, with chains wrapped around his body. Everyone noticed when the rest of the band arrived, but Dave's photo shoot continued. Serini, realizing the band was getting more and more upset by the minute, said to Newton, "Hey, let's take some shots of the rest of the band." Newton agreed and moved to another part of the estate to shoot the other band members. One of Newton's assistants, a guy named Loomis, later said, "I remember we shot Eddie with the guitar and Dave in many different ways. I don't specifically remember a band shot, but maybe we did one." Eddie, with his Les Paul hanging around his neck, was photographed near a tree and standing out in the grass on another part of the estate. After a lunch break, the shoot continued, but not much was accomplished. Eddie and Alex never seemed interested in what was happening, and Newton had never intended to photograph anyone other than Dave. The rest of the band left, and Helmut Newton and Dave continued their quest for art. As the sun began to set, Newton captured one of the only 2 photos to ever be released from that long day of shooting. It was a photo of shirtless Dave in front of that chain-link fence. The next day, all hell broke loose in the Van Halen camp and at Warner Brothers Records. Eddie and Alex saw the photo shoot for what it really was: Dave's attempt to be the star in the band. Serini was blamed, Dave was blamed, Van Halen's manager Noel Monk was in the middle trying to keep the band together. It was a complete mess. At some point, someone came up with the idea of doing another photo shoot, this time with a photographer who was seen to be more suited to photographing a band with some inner turmoil. Norman Seeff was a famous photographer, and his fame came from photographing rock bands. He had photographed Debbie Harry, Patti Smith, Tina and Ike Turner, Kiss, James Taylor, and many more. He was known for creating an environment that brought the subjects together. He seemed to have kind of a sixth sense for tensions, and he was known to work quickly to diffuse a situation. He just seemed to know when there was a problem. In a 2012 interview, Seeff was quoted as saying, "There are times when a group comes in for a session and I perceive there's tension among the members." He was very good at figuring that stuff out. When he saw Van Halen walk into his studio in late December, he knew something wasn't right. Seeff had Eddie plug in his Ibanez Destroyer the guitarist had brought along for the shoot. This was the famous Shark guitar, if you know about Ed's guitars. Someone in the band had a cassette of the not yet released Women and Children First album, and that was cranked up. Throw in a pint of whiskey and a big fat joint, and the party was on. With Eddie playing along to the new record and the band smoking, drinking, and singing along, Seeff shot away. The images he captured are now iconic. The front cover shot is amazing. Eddie's wailing on a note while falling back and being supported by his brother Alex, who's looking straight into the camera. Michael Anthony is grabbing the lower arm of the shark while giving a pained rock star expression. And Dave, well, he's being Dave. His look is the look he gave every female in the first 15 rows at each and every Van Halen concert. As awesome as that cover photo is, the back cover photo may be even better. It looks like the ultimate Van Halen came here to kick your ass photo. Eddie is pointing his finger at the camera like he's ready to fight you. Dave is flexing his bicep to make sure you know he means business, and Michael Anthony is post-toke of that fat joint I mentioned earlier. The photo shoot did exactly what it was supposed to do. It helped smooth over some of the fallout from the Helmut Newton photo shoot and got the band, mostly, back on the same page. When the band saw the resulting photos, they loved them. Those Norman C photos are now pretty synonymous with Van Halen. As for the Helmut Newton photos, I mentioned before only 2 photos were ever used, one of Dave and one of Eddie. A lot of money was spent by the record company for that shoot, and there really was no sense in completely wasting the money. One particular photo of Eddie was used in the promo pack that went out to advertise the March 1980 release of Women and Children First. It wasn't one of Eddie's normal boyish grins. No, you could almost see his disgust with that entire day, but it's a great Helmut Newton photo. The other photo that saw light of day was a photo of shirtless Dave. His leather pants on, kneeling in front of the chain link fence with his hands above his head and bound by chains at the wrists. As a bonus for buying the album, this photo was used for a 2-foot by 3-foot poster that was folded and included in the first 1 million copies pressed and sold of Women and Children First. Within 3 months, the album was platinum. Now, early in the video, I mentioned my somewhat personal connection to this story. Growing up, I got into hard rock music at a fairly young age. The first stuff I got into was Kiss, around 1977, 78-ish. I was about 6 years old, and they were at the peak of their fame. My older brother had their posters on his wall and most of the 8-tracks that were out at that time. After a couple years, I discovered AC/DC, also through my older brother, and fell in love with Back in Black. Around that same time, it must have been the fall of 1980, my brother came home from school, looked at me, my mom was there too, and said, "Man, check this out." He proceeded to unfold the 2-foot by 3-foot poster he had removed from his new copy of Women and Children First. And here it is, right here. There's David Lee Roth in all of his Women and Children First leather pants, Helmut Newton glory. "Who is that?" my mom asked. My brother replied, "That is Van Halen." That was the very first time I had seen or heard about the Mighty Van Halen. I stared at the black and white poster and knew I had to hear that record. I didn't find his copy of Women and Children First, but it wasn't long before the Van Halen 1 record appeared in his bedroom, and I listened to it in regular rotation along with Back in Black and Kiss Alive on my Donnie and Marie Osmond record player. Thanks so much for watching. You guys take care.